All right, let's jump right in with a pretty wild question. What if we could actually design our morality from the ground up? Today, we're going to dive into a radical idea from the work Beyond Dogma, the concept of creating a whole new moral architecture for our modern world. It's a huge idea, so let's break it down together. Okay, so let's start with the big one. Where does our morality even come from? For like centuries, the answer was pretty straightforward, right? Religion. It gave us the rules, the stories, the whole framework for what it meant to be a good person. But what if there's a completely different way to think about this? So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at how religion acted as society's original moral engineer. Then, we'll get into why it might be time for an upgrade. After that, we'll dive into what a new moral architecture could look like. And finally, we'll talk about why this is all about evolution, not revolution. All right, Section 1, Religion as a Moral Engineer. The key idea here, and it's a big one, is to try and see religion not just as a set of beliefs, but as a super powerful, super functional tool, a tool that was actually used to build and organize entire societies. Yeah, the source actually calls this moral engineering, and a great way to think about it is like it's the operating system for a society's ethics. It's the underlying code that gives everyone a shared sense of meaning. It regulates how people behave, and it basically keeps everything stable, especially back in the day when you didn't have all the modern laws and governments we have now. But this whole thing came with a pretty big trade-off. On the one hand, these systems were amazing at creating social stability and giving people a sense of purpose. But the flip side? Dogmatism. This really rigid, don't question it mindset that just refused to update, even when totally new scientific facts or philosophical ideas came along. And that resistance to change, well, that brings us right to our next point. It's the core argument for making an upgrade. If these old systems are so inflexible, why is it so important to evolve past them? Here's the real problem, right? A system that's built on rules that can never, ever change is actually pretty fragile, especially in a world that's changing as fast as ours is. It gives you this false sense of moral certainty, this feeling that you've got it all figured out. And maybe most importantly, it flat out refuses to be updated, even when brand new scientific discoveries come along that challenge its most basic ideas. So, all of that leads us right here to the proposed solution in Section 3, this idea of a new moral architecture. And the point isn't to just tear everything down and leave a big empty space. It's about carefully, thoughtfully designing a replacement that's actually based on evidence. And this quote really gets to the heart of it. The ultimate goal is to move away from just inheriting a static set of beliefs, and instead to help people build the skill of principled reasoning. The whole idea is to empower us to think through really tough ethical problems on our own, instead of just looking up the answer in some ancient rulebook. Okay, so principled reasoning sounds great, but it's also kind of abstract, right? So what does this new framework actually look like in the real world? How would you even train someone to do that? Well, the source lays out a pretty systematic approach to ethical training. And look, this is not about memorizing a list of do's and don'ts. It's about building real concrete skills. Things like understanding logic and learning how to spot your own biases, developing emotional regulation and empathy, analyzing messy, complex historical situations, and, super important, learning how to have open, respectful debates about ethics. So this whole new system is really built on a few key principles. First, it brings together modern science and solid philosophical thinking. Second, it's iterative. It's meant to be updated and reviewed. It's not the final word. Third, it still uses stories and narratives because those are powerful, but it uses them as teaching tools, not as unchangeable dogma. And the whole point of all this? To shrink our collective ignorance and hopefully prevent that kind of moral delusion that happens when you're 100% certain you're right. Okay, on to our last section, and this one is so important. Evolution, not revolution. This really gets to the heart of how a huge shift like this could even be possible in the first place. And yeah, let's just land on this point because it's absolutely crucial. This is not about suddenly tearing everything down overnight. Not at all. It's a vision for a slow, gradual, adaptive evolution of how we think about morality. And you can see the difference pretty clearly here. A revolutionary approach, that's abrupt. It's forced on people, and it claims to be the one and only final answer. But the evolutionary approach that's being talked about here, that's gradual. It's adaptive, and it's designed from the ground up to be revised as we learn more and our understanding gets better. So what's the end game here? Well, the long-term vision is to create a kind of living moral architecture, something that isn't just a static monument, but something that is constantly being shaped and refined by a global conversation. It's an ethical system that's literally designed to grow and evolve right along with us. So we'll just leave you with this to think about. If you were handed the keys, if you could design a moral system from scratch for our future, what would you keep from the past? And what would you definitely want to change? It's a huge question, I know. But the whole point of this idea is that it's a question we all have a stake in answering. Thanks for diving in with us.